Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Following his 8th defeat in 9 rounds in qualifying at the hands of George Russell, Lewis Hamilton made some very telling statements after the Montreal Grand Prix on what he seemed to imply was sabotage at Mercedes, suggesting that his tyres were coming out of the garage for crucial qualifying runs 2 to 3 degrees lower than he would be expecting them to be. Mercedes and James Allison have now responded to these claims, saying there is no truth to them at all. But will this be proven to be different when we get to Spain this upcoming weekend? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, lots of drama on the Silverstone Grand Prix coming up in a couple of weekends time, and still not all the tickets have been sold. Now, there will be multiple reasons for this. There isn't just one singular one, but Silverstone are trying to make it sound like the main problem is Red Bull, because as Stuart Pringle here says, I do recognise that we have had several years of a British driver dominating, and we didn't mind that as a British promoter. It has certainly been a lot harder with Red Bull dominating, so very interesting to hear that effectively the argument is they can't sell the tickets as they usually do because Red Bull are winning everything, and therefore nobody wants to, people don't want to go as much anymore. And maybe there is some degree of truth to that. There's also probably the fact that a British summer has been far from spectacular thus far. The reality that many, pockets and wallets are tighter than they have been for quite some time at the moment, but also the fact that the ticket price is just way too high, right? I mean, this is the point really that people are now raising. It's like, look, Silverstone are here talking about, oh, it's, Red Bull's fault or whatever, and Max's fault for winning so much that the race is less interesting to attend. And then you see the ticket prices on what it's going to take to attend for a family of 4. Even for general admission, it's going to cost you £1,000. If you're trying to actually, family of 4 in Stowe, that's going to be £2,000 over the weekend for a 2-day weekend ticket. And how dare Max make it unpopular in the UK? It's kind of a joke, right? I mean, I've never been to a Silverstone Grand Prix, and honestly, if this doesn't change, I don't think I intend to, because it's easier and cheaper in many ways to fly to Spain or fly to Imola or wherever and go to the Grand Prix there. Like, you pay less for the hotels plus the flights. Certainly to go to a Grand Prix like Hungary, it's way cheaper than it is to go to Silverstone in the UK. So I think that hopefully the promoter will see this over time and realise, okay, we might have to change our tactics somewhat here, because this dynamic pricing idea where it goes up over time with the demand levels and all this stuff, nobody likes it, and it's I think it's hurting the reputation of the Silverstone Grand Prix to some extent, and also is reducing the amount of people that are actually going to go. So intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comments. Just a quick bit of drama from around the motorsport world. You guys may know Tyre the Formula 2 champion of last season. He went to Super Formula, he's tried other things to keep it going in motorsport, because he was linked to, was it Audi or Sauber or Alfa Romeo as it was previously, but he never got the seat there, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Now, he was meant to be racing at Laguna Seca in IndyCar this upcoming weekend. This tweet, however, got deleted because McLaren have done it again. There's been loads of drama at McLaren, and I must say it's interesting that their Formula 1 project seems relatively on the rails, whereas in IndyCar and elsewhere, it's an absolute shambles at times, to be honest. This is what's happened at Arrow McLaren. They had the drama with Alex Palou, then David Malukas was in, then Malukas was injured, Callum Ilott comes in, then Teo Pourchaire in. Pourchaire was deemed to be the man for the future. They released David Malukas very controversially, and now, just yesterday, basically today actually, they've dropped Pourchaire. He's gone. They've just sacked him, cut him from the team, and they're signing Nolan Siegel instead for the rest of the season on a multi-year deal. So, what's happening at McLaren? I don't really understand it, but it was drama, so I thought I'd mention it. Carlos Sainz, the belief is, it's been reported now in many different places that the Williams deal is done, or very close to done, and is possibly going to be announced this week. So this is what was discussed by Ralf Schumacher, that the deal is basically done, and it will be announced soon. If the rumours are true, Carlos Sainz has signed with Williams, and that should be announced this week. To be honest, this was the best option for him, and I agree in the circumstances, but it's still not, I'm sure, if he does end up going to Williams, and it is announced very shortly, where he would have liked to have been, given the circumstances of driving for Ferrari and potentially having the Red Bull seat there as a possibility. That then disappeared as soon as Sergio Perez got that rather controversial extension. Let's talk about the Spanish Grand Prix. Since Spain 2016, Hamilton and Verstappen are actually now tied on 60 Grand Prix victories, which of course the site of Verstappen's first victory after that dramatic race all those years ago. But going into Spain, who are going to be the favourites? Obviously Red Bull will be the favourites. They've dominated this track for several years at this point, certainly in this era of regulations. And the general feeling is that at Barcelona, if your car works well there, it will work well relatively everywhere, and it's pretty good testing circuit, and usually a car that's pretty well-rounded can sometimes dominate at that track, and it's hard to overtake, although that's slightly different now due to the way the final couple of corners have been working out. Alpine, tricky spot as always. Pierre Gasly even says he's preparing for a tough run of races because there are simply no upgrades in the works. I imagine they are in the works, but there's just nothing happening on that Alpine car in the near future, while other teams around them and already ahead of them are actually bringing big upgrades. Toby Gruner from AMUS today says that the RB will receive this weekend's the biggest upgrade they're bringing in of the entire season. I think they might have brought something to Miami. They brought a new floor a while ago. They've got another new one coming here. New bodywork, new side pods, new rear wing, new floor, and they've got a mega upgrade on the way here. So at the start of the season, there was some concern, especially from teams such as McLaren, that RB were going to be like really, really good, and it turned out they're pretty good. They're not as good as I think McLaren feared they would be, just because they've now got that much closer partnership with Red Bull. They're taking as much as they can from the RB20 and the RB19. And now they're bringing big upgrades to the car. So we'll see if that really catapults them in the right direction here this upcoming weekends. Aston Martin, though, they are maybe ahead of RB, but potentially not for that long. Even Fernando Alonso says he's expecting to be fighting on the fringes of the points. So quite the fall off really from Aston Martin. But the big Aston story of the day is around Adrian Newey. Obviously, there's been speculation on Newey's future, where he's going to go, what that's going to look like. We've talked about the Ferrari rumours. Every few days there's rumours that he signed the deal with Ferrari. That feels to me like by far the most likely possibility, but we don't know if it's true. And apparently he recently visited Aston Martin's factory in Silverstone. Aston Martin, outside of Ferrari, is probably what makes the most sense, just because he'd be able to stay in the UK. They've got big resources over the coming years, although there were rumours that Lawrence Stroll doesn't especially, please Adrian Newey from a leadership perspective, and he looks at the way that Lawrence manages the team, the risk of him potentially selling it elsewhere and using Newey's joining potentially to bump up, the theoretical valuation of the team before selling it on. The fact that, of course, he still employs Lance Stroll to drive, which could be seen as an indication of not being an especially serious championship-winning organisation on some level. But the Times are reporting today that Aston Martin are now the front-runner to sign Adrian Newey, and he recently had talks, visited the factory. So when is this? We don't really know. What is recently? Is it a couple of months ago? Is it literally, on Wednesday? We don't really know the answer. Was it, Tuesday lunch yesterday? We don't really know the answer to these questions, but thought I'd mention it regardless, because if he does go to Aston, it's a bit of a job on his hands, is it not? The rumour was that Newey looked at Mercedes and said they're kind of on a spiral downhill. They've lost a lot of engineering talent. It's going to be a big job to turn Mercedes around. And if that is true, that Newey thought that and maybe still thinks that about Mercedes, surely he's got the same reservations on Aston Martin, maybe even to a greater extent. So there is that speculation, but of course they've got their own new wind tunnel on their own coming online very shortly indeed. Just in case you guys forgot, because I kind of almost forgot about this myself, Sergio Perez is going to have a 3-place grid penalty this weekend. It's not been a great circuit for him over the last few years. He's actually had stinkers at Spain, even though they are proper circuits by what Helmut Marko is about to describe. But he does have a 3-place penalty, of course, for driving back to the pits with the broken rear wing. The Red Bull were fined for. There was lots of drama about it, but I just thought I'd remind you guys, because he kind of needs a good weekend. Well, the question is, does he really? Because he's got the drive anyway. It's already locked in. The contract is done. But on some level, it does matter, because if you sign the new contract and then you fall off a cliff, there's obviously going to be pressure there immediately. And as Marko says, we extended him because we wanted to bring calm to our team, which unfortunately didn't quite work out. But now Checo has 3 races on 3 real racetracks ahead of him, so he can prove himself. I'm not sure this quite says, so if he doesn't do well, he's gone. I think he probably isn't gone regardless. I mean, he's literally got a new deal for next season and beyond. But he does say that, yeah, the next 3 tracks, we've got, of course, Silverstone coming up in a couple of weekends, some Austria before that, and hereby Spain. 3 proper racetracks where, no street circuit stuff. But then again, isn't Checo meant to be good on the street circuits? It's a matter for debate, obviously, but they'll need to turn it around. But let's talk about Mercedes and what's been happening over there, because, of course, there will be a driver alongside George Russell next season. It's almost certainly going to be Andrea Kimi Antonelli. You can weigh up the merits of that all day, and you have been in the comment section below of the last several videos. Jacques Villeneuve, though, did say that as far as he's concerned, yes, Antonelli, it's not only is he going to join join the team, but effectively it's Antonelli's team. Toto Wolff has been preparing this for a long time, and if anything, it's actually George Russell that should be somewhat concerned about what happens over the coming years rather than Kimi Antonelli. And actually, James Allison in this article we'll go on to discuss in a second, or actually this interview we're going to go on to discuss, did say that Antonelli, if the talent is there, the pressure won't massively matter. You know, when Max came in, even when Hamilton came in very early in his career, obviously he'd done a lot of testing, but, you know, he was thrown straight into a McLaren back in 2007. Ollie Behrman thrown straight into a Ferrari, and sure, P11 in qualifying, but very competitive job in the race, all things considered. So James Allison was doing an interview with Beyond the Grid from Formula One, and Allison's always really well spoken. Definitely recommend you guys go and listen to this in full. I'll leave a link in the description box below, or just find it on the F1 channel, but wanted to share the important snippets when it comes to what's been going on lately at Mercedes. So of course there's been talk on what they're going to do in Spain. Are Mercedes back? You know, like, is that true? Or is that, will we see if that's true? I think we'll see over the next 3 rounds. Like, they've been pretty good at Barcelona over the last few years. They were good there in 2022. They were good there in 2023 relative to how good the car was elsewhere. So they should be good at Barcelona. The issue is that other cars are more competitive this year, and the Red Bull is still probably going to be really strong. But he does say, I'd be surprised if we're on pole at the next race, but I'm absolutely certain that we can be as fast as anybody over the coming period. So obviously we can be as fast as anybody. They've got to execute, but there is a feeling there at Mercedes that there's no tracks they should be concerned about. They can be competitive everywhere. They've not only got a consistent car, but they've got a fast car with lots of downforce and, you know, lots of positives apparently to take away from what happened in Montreal. Is this another false dawn? That's another question, but I feel like if there's any time that Mercedes might finally have a grasp on it, it might just about be now, and Mercedes are speaking like they do, so I guess time will tell, and Spain is probably going to be pretty good for them anyway. The question is, how good is it going to be for them with respect to McLaren, with respect to Ferrari, and of course with respect to Max Verstappen, or maybe Sergio Perez, depending on if he can up his level. But the big drama really at Mercedes is, at least as of late, between the two drivers. We saw it last year, we saw it even in 2022. Things can get a little bit spicy at times between Hamilton and Russell. It makes perfect sense. Hamilton's the, you know, most successful driver in the history of the sport. Russell, really fast in qualifying, doesn't want to lose, especially now that Russell is going into the upcoming season thinking, well, I'm going to be the leader of this team. You know, I want to beat Hamilton, show that actually, you know what, I am the number one in the team already, and I'm the man who deserves to take this team forward in the long term, because still got to understand from George's point of view, Toto Wolff is still on the phone with Max Verstappen whenever he can, saying, look, we're back, Max, we've got a great car in 2026, we've got the best engine, you guys want, you know, you come and drive for us, we'll bring Helmut Marko, we'll bring Jos, we'll welcome you with open arms, whatever it takes type thing. So George does have to sit there and think, all right, I've got to make sure that I'm, you know, let's say expressing dominance on the team, because I can't be having Max come in and bully me or whatever the case is, if that was to potentially happen. Now, it's Antonelli for now, but let's say Antonelli does well and Max actually wants to join in 2026, you know, who goes at that point, right? So George needs to do as well as he can, and of course there's no better opportunity to consistently out-qualify, outscore, out-race if he can, although Hamilton's still the better race driver. I think there's no doubt on that. This year especially is a crucial time to do so, and of course George has some advantage this year naturally, just because he's going to get the upgrades first, because he's their driver for next year. He's going to be involved in all of the engineering meetings that Hamilton is not necessarily, certainly from now to the end of the season, because he's going to Ferrari. So there is some natural advantage there for George. Also for Hamilton, it's like, whatever, last year I'm not winning the championship anyway. It's all about Ferrari 2025 and beyond. But there was implication from Hamilton that the record in qualifying this year against George, which isn't good, it's now 8-1 in George's favour, despite over the last 2 years being neck and neck. I think after last season they were basically tied, you know, 22, 22, 23, 23, whatever it was, very close in terms of qualifying performances. Hamilton had outraced George, outscored George on the average of those 2 seasons. This year though, we are seeing a different story, and an 8-1 qualifying record for Russell over Hamilton is certainly, you know, causing questions. What's going on here? So Hamilton said on the 25th of May, this is actually before Montreal, that he doesn't expect to out-qualify George all year. And he was like, well, I'm not going to tell you, but we'll see about that. Then he made it clear in Montreal what he thinks might be going on, because he put in a mega lap, of course, in practice earlier in the day, and then qualifying comes around. couldn't quite get the lap together. And, well, Hamilton says, the tyres were working throughout the weekend. We got to qualifying. Every time I went out of the garage, the tyres were, for some reason, below on temperature. Every set was 2 or 3 degrees lower than it should have been. You can't catch it up like that. That's going to cost you probably a couple of tenths of a second, which is his gap this season to George Russell. Pretty much we'll see in a second. Something went on with the blankets, I guess, which is like, well, hang on, what's the implication here? The clear implication is that Mercedes have been tampering with it, right? It's like either they've got faulty blankets, which are only faulty only for Lewis, only during qualifying, or he's implying that there's some sort of deliberate sabotage tampering going on. So, understandably, James Allison was asked to comment on this and was like, okay, what's going on here? He talks about Lewis in general, talks about how good he is as a driver, saying that Lewis is the best driver that he's ever worked with, saying that, he would choose Lewis over Michael, right? Of course, Michael Schumacher. So, nice words. Allison's always good to listen to what, how eloquent he is and how much he thinks through his answers. But he obviously gives his thoughts as well on the qualifying situation, because he says Lewis has not by accident been the best qualifier in the history of the sport, because I think he's been the best driver in the sport, but he's struggling to make it stick this year by the fine margins. And I think to a degree, I was speculating this in an email that I sent to the factory yesterday that maybe Lewis Hamilton was copied on, that the current car tyre combo, not just us, but across the pit lane, it doesn't like being hustled around. You almost get the best lap times when you're not even trying, and you'll see every weekend, you'll see someone pop a lap time in free practice or in qualifying in some session or another. You'll see some car and you'll think, wow, how did that get there? And then they don't do it again. Is he talking about the Haas maybe? Because the Haas sometimes pops in a crazy lap that never seems to reappear. But honestly, you could argue the same thing for Hamilton. Puts in some monster laps in practice, and then when he's really hustling the car to try and get the most out of it, then maybe the tyres don't like it so much. They actually prefer being driven a little bit easier. And there has been talk on drivers to this effect as well. But then he was asked, okay, what about the comments on qualifying? I think if you look just at the stats, 8-1, maybe it was 7-1 back then, maybe it would be reasonable to think if that trend continues, there won't be many times where he'll be on pole. I think that if you try and read into stuff that isn't there, like there's somehow that he's got a systematic disadvantage on qualifying day, that is not true and not fair. So far as we can make it, the cars are identical. The engine use is identical. If the cars are different on setup, that's because the driving engineering on either side of the garage has been iterated too, but they have the chance to have identical stuff if they chose to do so. On one occasion this year, famously in Monaco, they had a different front wing, and we tried to get the wing on the other car, and then etc, etc. Lewis had let George have it. We talked about that before. But still, this is interesting that he doesn't mention the tyre temperature stuff specifically, but he does comment on this systematic disadvantage being untrue and unfair to characterize it as that. So effectively says, Lewis, you don't know what he's talking about. That's not true. And obviously he's going to say this. He's not going to say, yep, he caught us. We've been trying to sabotage him to make George look like the better driver so that he, I don't even know what the reason would be. Gains confidence or something for the upcoming season. Crush Lewis's confidence so he goes to Ferrari and doesn't do such a good job against Leclerc or whatever. Maybe there's some weird long-term game here that Toto's playing. I don't really buy it, but then again, I'm not sitting in the cockpit looking at my numbers on the dashboard, and apparently they're showing me that my tyres are 2 to 3 degrees lower than they should be. So what's happening here, right? Mercedes obviously are going to deny it, but it's interesting that Allison quite specifically referred to this situation and said that, yeah, that's not true. There's nothing of the sort. The cars are the same in all the moments. Now, we'll see what happens in Spain, because now Hamilton has made this thought public. We're now going to have a moment where people are saying, okay, what about the tyre temps for you here, Hamilton? Like, after qualifying, he's probably going to be asked the question, what were your tyre temps like? Were they what you expected them to be going into the qualifying lap? And we'll see if magically they're now exactly where they should be, and we'll see if this gap of 1.5 tenths, which has been average between Russell and Hamilton this season, which could well be explained by 2 or 3 degrees in tyre temperature difference at the start of a qualifying lap, if that were to change to any degree in Spain, it would be very interesting to note. So fascinated to see how this weekend's Grand Prix turns out. These are the timings here in the UK. So practice, obviously, on the Friday. Saturday is qualifying at 3 p.m. BST, and then restart time 2 p.m. BST, 3 p.m. local time in Barcelona, Catalonia. So very much interested your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.